Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's good to see you again, Chairman Powell. As you know, a few weeks ago, on Chair Yellen's last day in charge, the Fed issued a consent order against Wells Fargo prohibiting the bank from growing any larger until it made certain improvements. Now, the Fed also effectively forced Wells to remove an additional 4 board members this year. I've pushed the Fed for real accountability on Wells Fargo and its board for repeatedly cheating its customers. And I was glad to see the Fed take action. But I want to understand how the Fed intends to enforce the consent order now that you're in charge. The Fed requires Wells to submit 2 plans for approval by early April. One on improving the effectiveness of the board and one on improving the board's risk management practices. This is not clear from the order. Will the Fed Board of Governors vote on whether to accept these plans?
So we have delegated that approval to, I believe, to the head of supervision, but of course
staff.
That will take place. I assure you that will take place in serious consultation with the board.
Consultation, but the board is not going to vote on this?
That's not the plan.
Well, you know, I don't understand this. The Fed has issued a major, unprecedented consent order against one of the biggest banks in the world, and the Fed board, the people who are actually appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate, aren't going to vote on whether the order is actually being followed?
Well, of course, we did vote unanimously on
the
measures
measures. No, it's whether or not the
themselves.
order is actually being followed, because that's the big question here. You know, in my view, staff is not good enough, Chairman Powell. Fed board members are supposed to make the big decisions, and Fed board members are supposed to be accountable for these decisions. Will you consider requiring a vote of the Fed board before these plans are approved?
Yes.
Good. Thank you. I appreciate it. The next step is that an independent third party must review Wells' implementation of these plans by the end of September. Will you commit to making that independent review public, redacting any confidential supervisory information that's necessary? I think the public deserves a chance to understand how Wells is working to fix the mistakes that it has committed.
I cannot make that commitment to you without discussing it with my colleagues and with staff who are implementing this thing. I will look into it. Yes.
Will you look into it? Will you urge your colleagues to consider making this public?
If it can be made public,
I'm fine about redacting confidential supervisory information, but my view here is that the American public, given all that Wells has done, the American public has a right to see it, and all of those Wells customers who were cheated have a right to see whether or not Wells is actually following through on its promises. You can see why some people might lack a little confidence in that.
Right. So I will look at that, and if there's a way to do it that's faithful to our obligations and our practices, then.
Thank you. Good. And then lastly, the consent order says that the growth restriction remains in effect until Wells Fargo, quote, adopts and implements the plans that were approved by the Fed. So I want to be really clear on this. To lift the growth restriction, the Fed needs to see that the plans have been fully implemented, right? It's not enough that Wells has taken some preliminary steps toward implementing the plans. Is that right?
No, I don't think that is right. I think the thought was that once we've approved the plans and they begin to implement them, we see them on track, the growth restriction could then be addressed. No guarantee there, but we would then be prepared to look at it.
You know, I'm actually, then tell me, how much progress along that line is enough to remove the growth restriction?
Well, I think, again, we'll have to be happy with the plan itself. We'll have to be assured that the company has made these really significant measures and suffered a significant period of a growth cap. And, we will not lightly lift it, but I think that's our understanding of how we're going to do it.
You know, the growth restriction is your really big stick here. And I hope that you won't consider lifting it just because Wells makes some marginal progress. Wells should fix its problems before it is permitted to grow any bigger. The consent order sent a powerful message to big banks that there could be real consequences, including consequences for senior officials if they break the law. But that message will be lost if the Fed does not enforce the order strictly and show the public and the banking industry that they mean business. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.